Yes, welcome on in, everybody, to the Saturday Night Network for another edition of our countdown of SNL's greatest cast members of all time. My name is John Schneider from the SNN. Very honored to be back with you as we begin to look forward to talking about who is the greatest cast member of all time. We're in the low 20s now, so everyone we're going to talk about is going to be an absolute legend of the show. And I'm so excited to welcome back to the podcast this week to reveal 3 more cast members 2 weeks in a row. It's Bill Kenny. Bill, how are you?
Hey, John, I'm so happy to be here. This countdown, as I said last week, has been so much fun. We're really getting into the nitty gritty of it, and going to be some interesting conversations tonight with the 3 that we got lined up.
Yeah, Bill, how about that intro? Way better than last week.
Oh, much better. Yeah, no take 3.
No 3. Nailed it all. Yeah, that's just for the YouTube listeners. But yeah, it's very excited to be on here and very excited to welcome somebody onto the SNN for the first time. And you may have heard his voice if you love old SNL. And that would be Gary Seath from the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. Gary, how are you?
I'm doing well, John. Thank you for having me. This is great. This is going to be fun.
Yes. Of course. Gary, why don't you tell the listeners what podcast you do, so in case they haven't listened to it yet, so they know.
Sure. So I am a co-host of the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. My co-host Brad and I are going through every episode of Saturday Night Live seasons 1 through 5. So we load every sketch, every musical guest. It's a lot of fun. We're about halfway through, not quite halfway through season 2 at this point. And it's been a lot of fun. John, you've been on our show a couple of times talking about Buck Henry, and it's been great.
Yeah, I'm the Buck Henry correspondent for the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. So that's been a lot of fun. And seriously, like, there's been so many really well-written articles about the first 5 seasons of the show, some great documentaries, and some other good podcasts. But I have to just tell you, as a listener of your podcast, Gary, for both you and Brad, you are doing such a fantastic job going through that time of the show. It is just one of the most interesting television events ever to talk about the start of Saturday Night Live and how it developed. So congratulations on all your success.
Thank you very much. That means a lot, John. I appreciate it. And we're fans of your show. That's how we got connected with you. And to hear you say that about us makes me feel great. And I'm going to assume it's all about me and not Brad. So thank you very much.
That's true. All for you, Gary. Okay, enough love for each other, because we got to send some love to some cast members. And if you were, I saw a lot of people jumped in, by the way. Maybe they're checking out our season 49 coverage and you're like, oh, what's this? There's a countdown going on. So yeah, if you are just jumping in now, go back. We have a catalog of episodes counting down from 50 all the way through to last week's, the 25. So the first half of the countdown is available now. You can go through week by week and check out who made the list and why they made the list. But basically, over the summer, we asked all of our podcast listeners, all of our social media followers, and the general SNL community to vote for who they think the greatest cast members of all time are. And you may have different criteria based on, what era you grew up in, or if they're your favorites, or how much you've seen them on the show. Maybe you're a stats person. So there's a lot of criteria that go into what makes a great cast member. And we're trying to sum it all up and come up with the community's list for the greatest cast members of all time. So what I'm going to do now to start off our show, as we do every single week, is show you the list that has currently been released up until this point. Then I'm going to ask our panel what they think of the list so far. And we're going to get into revealing the next 3 names on the list. So I'm very excited to do that right now. If you're watching on YouTube, we will bring that up on screen. So here are the rankings, 50 through 25 so far. And here we go. I'll read them out from 50 all the way to 25. Kevin Nealon, Joe Piscopo, David Spade, Mikey Day, Tracy Morgan, Chevy Chase, Jimmy Fallon, Bowen Yang, Martin Short, Sherry O'Terry. Into the 40s, we got Ego Wodem, Taron Killam, Chris Parnell, John Lovitz, Beck Bennett, Jane Curtin, Seth Meyers, Daryl Hammond, Anna Gasteyer, Bobby Moynihan. 30 down, we got Tim Meadows, Vanessa Bayer, Bill Murray. And last week, we revealed Rachel Dratch, Adam Sandler, and Jan Hooks. So, Gary, this is your first time getting to talk about this list. How do you think the listeners have been doing so far?
This list is so all over the place for me personally. Some of these I'm like, oh, that's it. They nailed it. They should be there. And others I'm like pulling my hair out like, what? How are you talking? How are they so
Give me a
low?
couple examples.
I'm a huge Lovitz fan. So seeing Lovitz down in the 30s for me personally, I was like, oh, that kind of breaks my heart a little bit. And then there's some others where, look, I just said we do a podcast on the first 5 seasons of SNL. So I still watch the show and love the show today, but I felt like there's a little recency bias in some of these picks when we're talking about greatest of all time. But I mean, there are a few on here that I'm like, yeah, that kind of breaks my heart, and others that I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. Someone like Vanessa Bayer, to me, I love her, and talked to Thomasina about her a few times, and it's like, yeah, she's there around where I have her in my list, I think. So yeah, it's fun. This is a great podcast, and I love how seemingly polarizing this is for a lot of.
It's really fun because a lot of people have different opinions. Gary, before I head over to Bill, I just want to know Chevy Chase at 45. You just watched
Yeah,
the entire catalog of Chevy Chase as a cast member. You haven't seen all the times he comes back to host yet. I know
right.
you have in real life, but not as you're doing this rewatch. So, what do you think about 45 for Chevy there?
I'll tell you, as a cast member, I think that's very low for him. I'm not a huge Chevy fan. My partner Brad is not at all a Chevy fan. But watching every episode, every sketch of season one, I think he deserves to be a lot higher than he is in this list. But
Interesting.
yeah.
All right. Well, Bill, let me bring you in. We heard your thoughts last week on the list. So just sum up for the listeners where your head is on the list right now. Is it making sense to you, or are there some people that you really think deserve to be much higher or much lower?
I think much like Gary, there's some pleasant surprises to see. I mean, you're talking about almost 50 years of a show. You're talking about fans who many are in their 20s, may not have gotten back and watched everything. So to see people like Lovitz and Jan Hooks and Jane Curtin on the list is a pleasant surprise. But that being said, they really should be a lot higher when you look at the whole swath of the show. But yeah, I think as we get into it now, we're going to be really into the minutia of why somebody deserves to be where they are. So it's going to be interesting as we go forward here.
Exactly. Okay, so that is the list all the way to 25. Tonight we're going to do 24, 23, and 22. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the first person we are revealing tonight at number 24. And that is somebody we have talked a lot about on this podcast before. I'm very excited to discuss her career at the show. So here we go, 10 seasons at Saturday Night Live. And that would be Aidy Bryant, who was on the show from 2012 to 2022. We've, like I said, discussed her a lot, including when we did a wrap up of her career after she left the show in 2022. 197 episodes of the show, good for 7th all time on the list. 691 sketches, good for 16th all time. She's had a lot of recurring characters, some impressions that have recurred many times in an era where we didn't get those as much. She certainly is representative of an era that was really strong for women at the show, including with her counterparts, Cecily and Kate. So I think she is a fascinating case study. Is she too low? Is she too high? Is she just right? We're going to discuss that with our two gentlemen that have joined us here tonight. So, Bill, starting with you, thoughts on Aidy Bryant at 24?
I love this spot for her. As you know, as I've said, I made my own list when you started doing this, and I have her at 26. So this feels like the right spot for her. Maybe time will push her a little bit higher, but I think being on the show for 10 seasons, as you mentioned, the dominance of women on the show, really the first time in the history of the show that females dominated the entire show. You know, you had the Kristen Wiig era, but there was also a lot of positive male presence at that point. With Aidy and Kate and Cecily, it was their show. I mean, let's be honest, for about 6 or 7 years. So I think this is the right spot. She has a lot of great impressions that we're going to get into, a lot of great characters, and some may think that she overstayed her welcome. I don't personally, but I think 10 was just the right amount for her. So great spot for Aidy.
Gary, when I tell you that Aidy Bryant landed at 24 on the list, what are your thoughts on that?
I love Aidy Bryant, and I loved when she was on the show. I think in my list that I also made, I have her a little bit lower. She's down in the at 31 for me. But I do love Aidy Bryant, and I totally understand, and I'm happy that people put her up as high as they did. She's someone that I didn't expect to get as much love, and I'm so happy that she did, because she was someone who, for me watching the show, she would come in with these characters and just steal the scene, even when she wasn't the center of the sketch. And I think she was brilliant. She's a brilliant actress outside of the show as well. So I'm really happy that she's here.
Yeah, I think that early on in her career, I will be honest in thinking, and maybe some of our listeners would agree, that I felt that she was slightly one note in the types of stuff that she was doing on the show. And I really felt like she is somebody who grows tremendously on the show as she's going. She sort of figures out the game of the show and does some different things with her characters and the impressions. And she blends a couple of eras where she comes in post Kristen and is sort of figuring out how to work things out, first primarily with Cecily, where she does things like the Girlfriends talk show that got super popular. And then you'll see her and Kate paired together a lot, love it or hate it. But beyond those moments, I think like anytime I got to see Aidy Bryant without Kate McKinnon and without Cecily Strong, she was maybe the strongest person in those sketches. And I wonder, like, if 80's in an era without Cecily and Kate, despite the fact that we think of her so much as being a partner of Cecily and Kate, if we would think of her even higher than at 24, because she is so talented, just happened to be with two other legends of the show. So, Bill, thoughts on that?
Well, let's get our first sports analogy of the night. When you have three people at an MVP level, it kind of splits the vote, right? You have so many different characters, so many different pieces that they all do together and apart. So yeah, that is an interesting question. If you place her in something like the mid '90s or even pre Kristen, does she dominate the show in a way that Kristen ended up doing? Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I think being able to see what she was able to do in sketches on her own, she carried a lot of sketches, especially later in her career. I think you can kind of compare her to Mikey Day with that regard, as far as finding a renaissance later in their career and being able to kind of overtake the show. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the stats for 80. I mean, I'll go through my three categories again. Is this person born to be on SNL? Do they have the stats to back it up? And what is their legacy at the show? So I think definitely a sketch performer, probably figures it out more as she's going on. Like I mentioned, stats are interesting. Never dominant in stats in the way that her counterparts were, but season 38, she's 13th overall out of the cast in stats. 39, 7th. Season 40, 10th. Then season 41, 8, season 42, 10. So the first 5 seasons of her career, really not dominant of the show. She really picks it up in 43. She's 5th on the cast and sketch appearances, then 5th again in 44, 5th again in 45, and then tied for 13. She missed part of 46, and then 8th overall in 47. So she had a stretch there really between 43, 44, and 45, where she was one of the most dominant people on the show, let alone women on the show. But, she never had stats that really wowed you off the page, but she had some really big moments. So this is one of those cast members where we have to talk about, does the stats, really reflect her time at the show? Legacy, I think it's there. It's fresh. It's only, a year and a half ago that we stopped seeing her on the show, but I do think in the long run, we're going to look back at her era and she's going to be a huge part of it. So I think she has that too. She checks a lot of boxes for me, Gary. So for you, thoughts on everything we are talking about and some of those moments that you think really stood out for 80?
I think a true testament to 80's performances were that she could be in a scene with Kate or Cecily or whomever really and pull away from them in certain scenes and be the focal point of the sketch, or she could kind of retreat into the background and play the straight person to the zany characters, and she was able to do that. She was one of those people that in one show she was playing a child, which she perfected. She was a great young kid character, and then she would play the mom in the next sketch, and just the range that I think she had went a little unnoticed, because when she was in the background, it was to Kate and Cecily, like these big performers, and she was able to step up when she needed to, when it was her turn, and take a back seat when she had to. To me, it's kind of like she was akin, that ability to do that is kind of akin to the way someone like a Phil Hartman was able to lead a sketch or step back and let someone else shine. And I think she was great at that. And her camaraderie with her co-stars was just amazing, because she let everyone play. Like everyone got a chance when she was on screen with them. It was, yeah, I think she's great.
It's very high praise. So I love that. Bill, what do you think about some of the moments? Let's talk about some of the characters and things when you think back at 80's career that I know a lot of our listeners will have seen most of these, but really represent her time at the show.
Well, and to add on to that a little bit, I think it's an overused word sometimes with SNL or comedy in general, but I think it's true for 80. I think she's fearless. I think she didn't mind being the fool. And you saw that in things like Steakhouse with Seth Rogen, where she's got the two broken arms and he's feeding her, and it just insanity ensues with, she loses her shirt and Tonkerbell is another one I think of too, the half sister of Tinkerbell, who's just drunk and really rude and obnoxious. And those are the kind of moments I think of with 80, who just had no problem playing crazy characters and making the most out of it.
Gary, what about you? What are some moments from 80's career that you would like to remind the listeners of?
I think the Carrie Crum character on Weekend Update, the travel expert who was a 7-year-old or something. So like all of her references were to her family's houses and stuff. I thought that was great. Tonkerbell, yeah, that was one that I loved. She had the Melanie character, sorry, the girl who they would be at the slumber parties and stuff, and was always attracted to the father and made everyone uncomfortable. And that I thought she was precious in those. And then there was one sketch that I found recently where she played a hen, and I think it was Ryan Gosling was the host, and she plays a talking chicken, a hen, and she's brilliant in that. Just that was one of those like crazy off kilter sketches that I love, and I thought she was great.
Absolutely. A couple standout moments for me when I look back that, again, it was really, really hard in 2022 after seeing 80 Bryant on the show for 10 years to parse through these moments and say, like, I'm going to appreciate everything. But now that time has passed a little bit, I look back really fondly on some moments, including her playing the adult film girl, which was, she was the one who like walked into a porno and didn't know what she was doing there. And like, it was like, talking to Amy Schumer as her teacher and things like that. And she played like the innocent question person so well. I thought that was so great. I do think back to her. I again, whether still not sure if I could say this or not, so I'll put that the preface on this. But the Dyke and Fats that she did with Kate McKinnon back in the day, who again were playing more to type, but really was kind of fun, and she was able to like have fun at herself and stuff like that. The waterbed warehouse I see listed as one of these best moments. That was something that I just waterbeds are the best. That type of thing I remember from back in the day, and I also really think that some moments that she had in the last couple of years are some of her best in her career. Trend Forecasters was huge. We couldn't stop talking about that in season 47. The Sleepy Town USA Get the Killing Gun, that was the first like PDD live sketch that we were really talking about that they wrote and got on the show, and everybody loved that. Like, she made that sketch. And then her moment with Oscar Isaac, where she's, talking about, being 80 to the camera. Like, these were moments that we loved from 80 Bryan that we didn't necessarily get during those Trump years, where she was playing Sarah Huckabee Sanders or Ted Cruz so many times that people didn't care for as much. Like, 80 had just such a fun personality that sometimes I wish came out even more. So, Bill, anything else, any other moments on your list you want to bring up?
Well, just to add on to the trend forecasters, I think much like Vanessa and Molly, one of her best characters is at the end of her career on Weekend Update. So that's really, really interesting to see how that developed. And it's something I think we'll be talking about 10 years from now. But the other thing I would bring up would be the pre-tapes that they did, all the women, Back Home Ballers and Do It in My Twin Bed, when she played Little Baby 80. That was just a great showcase for the show and for 80, when there'd be 6 or 7 of these female cast members in these pre-tapes, and still memorable to this day.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll just say, just summing up some of my other notes. So 3.3 sketches per episode, good for 48th all time. So definitely involved in the show, never dominant. But I would also like to mention, Rolling Stone. That is a list that was put out in SNL 40. We always like to make fun of where they ranked everybody. They didn't give a complete ranking for 80 as she was sort of 3 or 4 years into her career at the show, ranked her among the new kids, 81 to 96. So here we have a proper ranking for her 10 years into the show. Gary, I'd love to know from you overall, too high, too low, or just right for 80, and any final thoughts?
I think in my initial thought process, it was a little high, but not unwarranted, like not something that I'm like, this is a ridiculous, because I think she was so strong. And we didn't even talk about like her rapping and her ability to do the musical numbers. She was excellent. So a little high for me, but still, not totally out of left field.
Absolutely. So there you go. A.D. Bryant at number 24 on the list. I am very excited to continue to talk about what's going to come up on the list next, because I think this is as big of a name as A.D. is, and her legacy at the show. Number 23 is a big one of the biggest in the history of the show in terms of legacy. So get excited to talk about one of the original cast members, and that would be John Belushi here at number 23, 4 seasons on the show. I will say, my first watch of the show, I tried to remain unspoiled, had no idea he left after 4 seasons. I was like, so thought that like legacy wise in my mind, he was an original cast member all the way through because of how big of a deal John Belushi always was. I mean, obviously, passed way too young, way too early on. But, I think about some of the moments he had on the show as he, we compare Belushi to Chevy or Belushi to Aykroyd, but I mean, himself was a force of nature when he really, really wanted it and brought it to the show. Had so many huge moments at the show. 4 seasons, 1975 to 1979, and I think 86 episodes of the show as well. And honestly, I don't think you could ask anyone from any generation, name me SNL cast members from back in the day. I think John Belushi's at the top of the list that people know, even though he's not been with us for 40 something years. So it's just an incredible person to get to talk about now so many years later, and here at number 23. So Gary, as one of the hosts of the Not Ready for Primetime podcast, thoughts on John Belushi here at number 23?
This is very low for my taste. And I'm not the John Belushi apologist that Brad is on our show. He is one of the original cast members. Like you said, he did so much to set the tone for the show, and to do different things. He had the first recurring character with Samurai, like not counting the bees. Let's not count them, but and to just have these characters that he could play with, different hosts, and they would come in and do these things. And he was someone who, I understand he's polarizing, and I understand why he may be further down on the list now than he may have been, I don't know, 10 years ago, as someone said in the chat. But he brought so much to the show. He was the one that they expected to be the breakout star, really, right? And then that caused problems behind the scenes when Chevy was. But I mean, this is ridiculously low, I think, because he was such a force as a sketch player in his 4 seasons of Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. I mean, look, the show is so different now than it was in the 70s. And save for his one appearance in season 7, we have no, record of John Belushi in any other era of the show. To be able to talk about what he would look like, making a random appearance now in the 2020s. So we could always sort of like compare era to era. And it's the conversation becomes like, as if we're doing these rankings in 1980, I mean, he could be number 1 on the list, right? And then now, so many years later, there's just so many cast members who have done so many different things at the show. It's hard to know really where to place a guy like John, who, truth be told, may be lower on the list because of some of the I guess we'll use a sports analogy but here, but like off the field issues that have been talked about him since then. So Bill, taking all that into account, what did you think? John Belushi at 23.
Criminally low. This Jan was a disappointment last week with how low she was. This is almost as bad to me. We've talked a lot about Eddie saving the show, Will Ferrell saving the show, Phil Hartman saving the show. John maybe didn't save the show, but if you put yourself back in a time machine in 1976 and the only star, really the only star from season 1 has just left your show, and you have 6 cast members plus Billy Murray coming in shortly thereafter, you don't know what the show is going to look like. I mean, Chevy was in so many sketches. He dominated that first season, and then he just up and left. And for John to step into that vacuum, was amazing. And to look back on it now, it's really impressive that maybe not save the show. It was an institution, becoming an institution already, but damn close. And for that all being said, and what he brought to the show as far as characters and impressions, very, very important in the history of the show. So I have him at number 12. So I think this is really, really low.
Yeah, I mean, number 12, but this is only 11 spots down. Like, it's not like you had him at 1. So that isn't. I actually thought you were going to say that he was higher on your list, but I get that. Probably more correct. Now, I think something that's fascinating, and I was thinking about this all afternoon, is like, if Mike Murray was doing Screen Time and the By the Numbers show back in the 70s, I think we would have a very real debate about statistical numbers versus impact on the screen. Because John Belushi, despite being in 4.24 sketches per episode, which is good for 18th all time among cast members with 30 or more episodes, there were less cast members then, so more opportunity for him to be in sketches. But if you really look at it in terms of, season to season, who was in the most sketches? Season 1, 4th overall. Season 2, 5th overall. Season 3, 4th overall. Season 4, 5 overall. So basically 4, 5, 4, 5 for those first 4 seasons. So his moments were not the entire show, but there were sketches where people would walk away and see like 1 or 2 Belushi moments a night and be like, wow, those are the things they took away from the show, as opposed to him, spreading out his statistics throughout the night. So I think it's a really interesting discussion to have with somebody like you, Gary, who's like watching these episodes on a week-to-week basis, is that like, is somebody who produced like into the Gilda level or to the Chevy level of season 1, who's basically all over the show, more impactful than someone like Belushi, who shines in 1 or 2 moments a night?
I don't know, because he had some of those moments, like you said, those 1 or 2 moments in a night where he would come out and do Joe Cocker and just sing an entire song as Joe Cocker. And that was it. Like, everyone took that away from that episode. He'd come out and do Marlon Brando. And when he did those, like that impression, that was the thing that you walked away from the show going, wow, like the rest of that episode was pretty good. But that Marlon Brando sketch, that was amazing. Right. So I think when he took over a sketch, it would take over the show. And some shows he wouldn't have those, and he would be kind of quiet and not really take your breath away. But then he would have other shows where he would like dominate with 1 or 2 or 3 sketches that were just like bulldoze over everything, because he was such a force. And it is, he is kind of polarizing now, but I think at the time he was just such a unique comedic voice in 1975, 76, 77, that people were kind of like, wow, this guy's kind of nuts, but he's hilarious when he's nuts. He's like throwing himself on the ground and doing these things that are just insane for laughs. And he got the laughs. I don't know. He was a scene stealer. Definitely.
Bill, I asked the question. I'm going to answer it for myself before I get to you, which is that I wonder if John Belushi was in 7 sketches a night, if SNL would have been worse, because I just feel like, as great as Belushi was, the moments were so few, were more few and far between, to the point where we could appreciate them more. But if it was the John Belushi show for seasons 2, 3, and 4, in the way that it was the Chevy Chase show in season 1, I don't know that SNL is as remembered fondly as it is now. What do you think of that?
That's a great point. I think, you wouldn't want to see him in that many sketches a night. I think the magnetism that he brought to the 2 or 3 roles he did every night is much more important than having him as the husband in a scene or a pitch man. So being able to have him come on and do the samurai and maybe one other thing, that was plenty. And I don't know if it would be, because now, when it's looked back on, it's the ensemble. Everybody appreciates the 8 cast members from that era pretty equally. I think it took a long time to get the appreciation for Garrett and Lorraine and even Jane. But at the time, I think that might have ruined the show. Absolutely.
Bill, let's talk about some of those moments that people may remember from back in the day. So can you give us a couple that really stood out to you?
Well, you have to bring up the Blues Brothers. I mean, they're really the only musical guests that were also cast members are John and Dan. And they were in one of the best episodes of all time with the Steve Martin Blues Brothers episode. One of the best movies of all time, especially taken out of an SNL sketch. Sorry, Wayne's World. But Yeah, that they were able to do that in such a way. It's so hard to explain to people today. I can't even imagine having a musical guest out of the cast that's on there today. So that was something that kind of overtook pop culture. And then I love his William Shatner. He does this one of the famous sketches with Star Trek, where they're shutting down the Star Trek set at the same time they're filming an episode, and he plays this wonderful, wonderful impression of William Shatner. So those are two of my favorite moments for sure.
Yeah, one of the longest sketches of all time as well.
That's right.
Just a fascinating one to go look at if you've never checked that out, from season 1, episode 22. Gary, for you, some moments from Belushi's career that you would recommend to people to check out.
I mentioned Brando. There's a Godfather therapy sketch with Elliot Gould that is just phenomenal for both him and Lorraine. That was great. I mean, there's the Olympus Cafe, cheeseburger, and Beethoven. Like, that's one that was in the best of shows for a long time. Was him as Beethoven, which is just funny. And of course, the little chocolate donuts. I think you could see that was one where they, showed off the athletic ability of John Belushi with
For
the
sure.
chocolate donut breakfast. Yeah.
I have to bring up, of course, one of the most haunting moments in the history of the show, which would be "Don't Look Back in Anger," where this is a Tom Schiller piece where Belushi but Gary, I cannot wait for you guys to get to that episode to talk about this moment. But just where, basically it's the not ready for primetime cemetery as Belushi is walking around and looking at all of his, cast members that have passed away, and he's the last one left, and it is just so crazy in retrospect to watch that, and it's like, the joke of the sketch is like realized in real life because it's flipped in reverse, and it's just a fascinating moment to look back at. And look, I think that so look, was John Belushi born to be on the show? No doubt. I think he's probably near the top 5 people in the history of the show that was meant for the show. The show was built around people like John Belushi. So absolutely, no question. Statistically does pretty well. I mean, 4.24 sketches per episode. Like I said, that's pretty high. Caveat being less cast members, but still, I mean, he was still very much a part of the show, had those huge moments and huge highs. Legacy, I don't know that there's many people with a bigger legacy at the show than John Belushi, despite his passing. His brother Jim was a cast member on the show. That connection, how the show was created with, people like John Belushi as a cast member in mind. Like, you have to think about that. His death being brought up on the show for years and years. I mean, his late white his Judy Belushi being a writer at the show as well for one season or a couple episodes. We got to interview her on our show. There's just like so much Belushi connection, so many Belushi connections to the history of the show that for me, it's like his name is ingrained with Saturday Night Live. So to me, he checks all the boxes of what is probably deserving to be somewhere for me around the top 10 in the history of the show, similar to where Bill has put him. So I think I agree with the guys. Definitely too low. I would like to also mention Rolling Stone in SNL 40, despite our problems with with their list, actually ranked John Belushi as their number 1 cast member at that time. They said nobody embodies the highs and lows of Saturday Night Live like John Belushi. He was the rock and roll star of comedy and everything the show was supposed to be about. I will say I don't know that in truly analyzing the show and the history of the show that he is the greatest cast member in the history of the show, but there is an argument, and I think that we're discussing it now. So I'm going to give Bill and Gary final thoughts on Belushi and anything else they want to bring up. Bill, starting with you.
Yeah, this may be the first cast member that we've come upon that you can make an argument for number 1. It's a strained argument at this point because of how many people have come since then. But yeah, he's definitely near the top of the list. The only other thing that I'd bring up is if you want to see him in a sweet, we remember him as this frantic, frenetic character. It's on YouTube. Watch The Laundromat with Gilda. It's a wordless sketch. It's him in a laundromat with Gilda, and they decide to share. They're strangers who decide to share a washing machine. It's a 4-minute. It's beautifully made, and it's the two of these wonderful actors together in a scene together. So I would recommend that.
Quick question for you, Bill, before I just go on to Gary and his final thoughts. Do you think if Belushi, this is a question I had also, do you think if Belushi stays for season 5, we think of his legacy as even greater?
Oh, 100%. Because season 5 kind of gets lumped in with the greatest cast, the golden era. It's a little rough, and a lot of the roles that would have went to him went to lesser cast members, and Billy Murray had to carry too much of the load along with that. So yeah, I think it would have been much different.
Gary, final thoughts on John Belushi here at 23.
Well, he's way too low in my opinion. I have him as number 8 myself. Bill, I was going to bring up the laundromat sketch because I think it is a great piece that showcases his talent in this, no dialogue. Like you said, it's beautiful. I think he's just, he's someone who I wish the drug problem didn't happen for him. And we really could have seen what he was like. His season 1, he's a very different John Belushi than he is in season 4. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but I think you really saw the total ability of John Belushi in that first season and season and a half, really, before things become issues outside of the show for him. So that's the part where I think if that wasn't a problem for him, we would be having a different conversation right now.
Absolutely. Well, at the end of the show, I'll give you where I think John Belushi ranks so far on the list. So that's coming up, but we still got one more cast member to talk about tonight on the show. And yeah, it's another cast member we got to talk about recently on our show. It's somebody who I really, really enjoyed their time at Saturday Night Live. 7 seasons at the show, pretty much exactly 7 seasons at the show. And she was so much fun to get to see her work at Saturday Night Live. And that would be the wonderful Molly Shannon at number 22 from February 1995, where she blends into the end of this era and joins the new one all the way to Feb of 2001, does 117 episodes at the show, 34th all time, tied with Tina, 415 sketches, 41st all time, and had a lot of characters. Really, really just a pure force at the show, I would say at times. And I love Molly Shannon, and we got to talk about her as she came back to host for the second time last year in season 48. And yeah, it's just anytime that she pops up, I just find it so exciting. She really represents a lot to me about what I enjoy at the show. So Bill, I'm so curious from you, what do you think about Molly's place on the list here at 22?
Fans got this one right. I have her at 23. So this is pretty much exactly the same. Yeah, I talk about probably, maybe along with Gilda, the best physical actress comedian that we've ever had on SNL. She threw herself literally and figuratively into every role. And yeah, loved everything about her on the show. We don't necessarily consider that era a golden era, but it's definitely a silver era. It certainly saved the show with the likes of Molly and Will and Sherry. So yeah, I think this is great placement for her. A lot of memorable stuff, even 20 years after she was on the show.
Gary, what do you remember about Molly Shannon? What do you think about her place here on the list at 22?
What my first thought with Molly Shannon, what I remember is just up for anything. She was so full of energy and willing to literally throw her body around for any sketch. I had her right at 22 myself. So when I found out she was 22, I was like, oh, I got something right, maybe.
Nailed it.
Yeah, I loved Molly Shannon on the show. I think she was someone who could take a sketch and just be so out there with it and commit to it that it made you believe like, oh, that Mary Catherine Gallagher character is nuts and she's great. And I'm really happy that this is where she landed on the list.
Yeah, definitely. She, you just think about those characters so much. She is such a great character actress at the show. With Mary Catherine Gallagher, I mean, some people, didn't love it, but I really enjoyed it every time it was on screen. I loved how she could do both completely over the top characters and really diminutive characters. Like the comparison, the fact that she could do Delicious Dish and then also do Mary Catherine Gallagher shows her range at the show, which was really incredible. And the show, like, needed someone like Molly. I saw someone use the word utility player in the chat. I do think that applies at times to Molly, because I think that when you're a writer in the 90s at the show and you're looking for somebody to be in your sketch, I think Molly's like at the top of the draft board because she could play so many different parts in your sketch that you're writing. So there's a lot of really, really great recurring character work and a lot of really interesting impressions. Like we talked last year when she was coming back on the show of like, could we see a Monica Lewinsky impression? The Courtney Love impression was the big one back in the 90s. And even her Angelina Jolie, like she really does. She has a lot of range in a way that a lot of cast members don't. And as much as I do love Sherry and Anna, for me, I had Molly at the top of my personal list of those because I think that she just brings like an element to the show in the way that like a Kristen brought to the show and a Kate brought to the show later on. Like she's more to me in those tiers of cast members with the types of roles that she could play. And she does have a really strong resume. So Bill, for you, what are some standout moments from Molly Shannon that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I'm glad that the fans didn't take points off for SNL, not Molly's fault, but SNL's fault for running characters into the ground. And she was part of that era where that kind of happened a lot. I think her Mary Catherine Gallagher is brilliant. I think I love Miss Colleen on Dog Show with Will Ferrell. That's one of my favorites. And Sally O'Malley, really. I mean, I'm 50 years old. She didn't do that a lot, but that was one of my favorites when she would pull that out. So yeah, just fearless, brilliant comedic actress.
Gary, what are some moments for you on your list of Molly Shannon moments that you like to talk about?
I was a huge Sally O'Malley fan also. I really liked the Ann Miller character she did with Sherry O'Terry as the two older women. And then the Veronica the supermodel character that hosted the show. It was always funny to me. Like that was one that I was like, this is for some reason that just always got me. And I thought she was great in that. And the Courtney Love character was another one that at that time I thought it was great.
Yeah, and I think, oftentimes I factor, appearances that happen after their cast member into my rankings of some of these people because I do think that legacy of the show is important. The fact that, she comes back to host the show in season 32 and then in 48, like these are really big moments to see the community as excited as they were, despite, maybe her episode not being the best last season. Everybody was so excited to just have her in the building that I think that definitely adds to my view of how she's remembered as a cast member. Yeah, we talked about some of those big moments. I mean, Jeannie Darcy, Sally O'Malley, like everyone was very excited. I love what they did with Jeannie Darcy last time in 48, put her in a pre-tape. Those are some really exciting moments. I saw Goth Talk mentioned in the chat with Chris Kattan, Dog Show with Will Ferrell. Like these are some really good things that she could work with a lot of different cast members on the show. Like she works with Anna Gasteyer, she works with Will Ferrell, she works with Chris Kattan. Like to me, there's that just shows her ability to do things that some other cast members don't. Like oftentimes they'll have a scene partner and that's the person you expect them to be on the stage with. But Molly, you never knew what you were going to get. And I did like that despite how many times, as Bill mentioned, they may have replayed certain characters. She, as far as her stats are concerned, 3.31 sketches per episode. That is 47th all time. So she is right ahead of Aidy Bryant in terms of sketches per episode. In terms of how she ranked compared to her castmates in different seasons. So season 20, she comes on the end. So she's really only 15th overall. Season 21, 8th overall, but she has a huge jump up. Season 22, 23, and 24 on the show are clearly her prime at 3, 4, and 5, overall in terms of sketches for those seasons. So that's like the range when you're really looking for Molly Shannon to dominate the show. She is definitely up there in the top 5 for those 3 seasons. Bill, any other thoughts on Molly Shannon and her place here at 22? I know Gary said just absolutely nailed it on the list, and you were very close as well. So anything else you should take when you're thinking about Molly Shannon's time at the show?
Well, you bring up Jeannie Darcy, and just like with Aidy earlier on tonight, I think it's funny that they're both on this particular episode. That was at the end of her career. So that's one of the more memorable characters to me. I really loved what she did with that. And you can't say enough about her Monica Lewinsky. If you were alive back then, you know that most of the comedy shows, most of the late night were extremely mean to Monica Lewinsky, especially in hindsight. I think Molly found a sweetness in her impression of Monica despite everything that was going on. And they might have done some mean impressions of other people in those particular sketches, but I think Molly's portrayal of Monica still stands up today.
So back 10 years ago, Rolling Stone had Molly Shannon ranked as 40th overall as a cast member. Definitely too low, especially at that time. So they basically docked her for Mary Catherine Gallagher and said it appeared way too much, which is sort of what Bill was alluding to in that sense, which is that like these were characters that were played over and over and over again. But that was the time of the show, and that was going to happen. You know, if you think that was bad, talk about the generation ahead of her, where you get to see those characters at least 20 times. So definitely not the fault of Molly. And if you do like her on the show, you're really going to like her at the show when you get to watch all those episodes, because if you go back to that era, like there's a lot of Molly that you get to see. So Gary, any final thoughts on Molly Shannon here at 22?
It's right where I had her. I think she's great. I loved that she could match the energy of any of her cast members, and she was on with some high energy, high octane cast members. So yeah, I think this was a great pick, and she deserves to be this high.
My only legacy question for Molly Shannon as we wrap up our discussion today is just, what if she had stayed a few more seasons as we started to get into, you know, though Molly and Anna and Sherry really did have some great moments on the show and represented a time where women were starting to really like carve their place at the show. Tina Fey, you know, takes off and changes the game for women at the show from 2000 onwards. So Molly and Tina cross over like very briefly. But I am curious, you know, had I seen Molly Shannon as a cast member with the Maya Rudolphs of the world and Amy Poehler's of the world, you know, when they get there, seeing someone as talented as Molly in those eras, I think had she been on a couple more seasons, I think she's further up the list here, because the game of the show really changes, you know, as we start to move out of Molly's era. So that's just a question that I do think about sometimes when we're starting to think of what if with some of these cast members. Okay, there you go. 3 cast members were revealed tonight. Aidy Bryant at 24, John Belushi at 23, and then Molly Shannon at 22. So that was the list that you put out. I'm going to give Bill and Gary my new updated rankings, and I'll tell you where I placed these 3 cast members in them as we wrap up our show and do our last segment of the night. So I'll place those up on screen for everybody here on YouTube to see. Changed up the graphic a little bit, so hopefully you guys can see where everything is. But in case you can't, I will read it out to you. So we have on the left side, we have 50 all the way through 22. On the right side, we have 1 down to 29, the 29 cast members we have revealed so far. From the bottom of the list, of course, Martin Short at 29, followed by David Spade at 28, Bowen Yang at 27, Tracy Morgan 26, Ego Wodem at 25, Chevy Chase 24, Mikey Day 23, Sherry O'Terry 22, Joe Piscopo 21. The middle of the list is my where I have Tim Meadows at 20. Sandler I placed last week at 19, right behind Seth Meyers at 18, Jimmy Fallon at 17, Taron Killam at 16. Vanessa Bayer came on last week, was at 15, Anna Gasteyer 14, Rachel Dratch 13. So we had a great debate last week about where to place those 3 women. Ultimately settled on 15, 14, and 13 now. 12 is Kevin Nealon. 11 is Chris Parnell. And here is my top 10. All 3 people tonight I have put actually in my top 10 so far. Bobby Moynihan at 10, Beck Bennett at 9, and then in comes Aidy Bryant at number 8. I was thinking about this a lot, how to place Aidy Bryant versus Molly Shannon, and I have Molly Shannon at 7. I think these two just have such large legacies at the show. This was my right place for them. I can make an argument to put them above the Beck Bennetts and the Bobbies of the world, but not ahead of the people in front of them. Deciding who to put higher, Molly or Aidy. Ultimately, the fact that Molly's come back and hosted twice was a really, really big deal for me to place her at 7. And just, I think not enough time has passed. Maybe I'd put Aidy above her in the future. We may see Aidy this fall. We'll see. But, that's just something that I thought about. 6, Jane Curtin. 5, John Lovitz. 4, Daryl Hammond. And at 3, I put John Belushi. Just like I said, one of the biggest legacies in the history of the show. Could make an argument for greatest cast member of all time. I couldn't put him ahead of Jan Hooks and Bill Murray. I was thinking about that all day. I just think that Bill Murray, being a 5-timer, coming back and hosting the show, having such a legacy of his own since he was a cast member, and Jan Hooks as well. Like, I really felt like, unfortunately, it's not John's fault that he's not around. But if John Belushi was still alive today, he would be above Bill Murray and Jan Hooks, because we would have seen him many more times at the show. But just based on what I have to talk about, the resume, that's where I felt comfortable putting him. Bill, thoughts on where I place these 3 cast members?
I see you haven't moved Martin Short yet, so I guess we need to talk about that. No, no, this seems pretty good. I boy, it really just gets tough, right? I think Belushi's ahead of Billy, but yeah, I think you have a good placement with him there. Yeah, I would definitely have Molly slightly ahead of 80 as well. I do. So, yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Bottom of your list, notwithstanding.
Fair enough. And by the way, for the bottom of the list, I do have Mikey Day at 23. Just in the real time, Mikey Day currently playing the president and set to play the president into 2024, also dominating season 49. He could move up the list by the time this whole ranking wraps up. So that's just saying. The list is fluid. But anyways, Gary, what do you think about where I place Belushi on the list so far, in addition to Molly and 80 here? So 3, 7, and 8.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to argue about Molly and 80. I think I agree. I have Molly ahead of 80 in certain ways, and I think everyone that you have above them, if you had placed them above them, then you and I might be having words about that. But Belushi, I have trouble with that because he did so much as a cast member, and I understand your rationale behind it. And look, Bill Murray and Jan Hooks are two of the greatest. So, that's, yeah, I get it. I don't totally agree with it, but I understand where you're coming from with it.
Yeah,
And
but I want a better
agree with
explanation.
Bill.
What is it about? Like, so your
Well,
list, you would have Belushi above Bill Murray and Jan Hooks, but why?
Well, because I think for me, I don't take if he's as a cast member, Bill Murray coming back to host 5 times isn't a factor for me because, well, John Belushi was dead. He couldn't do it, right? But also as a cast member, his work as a cast member I thought was just stronger, and even though he and Billy are contemporaries and they work together really well, and they had worked together before the show, John like laid the groundwork for a lot of this stuff. And I think for me, again, going back and watching all of these early episodes right now, just seeing all of those early cast members kind of lay the foundation for what the show eventually becomes. I think they deserve a lot of credit for that. And that's a lot of heavy lifting that they did, that they, especially, not just John and Dan, but that entire cast, to me is always a little, they kind of get the short shrift.
For sure. Other argument to consider here, though, is that Bill Murray does do a lot of heavy lifting in season 5 when John Belushi isn't there. So, if there's definitely pros and cons to both sides of things. Bill, I just would love you to jump in on this quick conversation, the top 3, as we're debating some of the goats between Bill, Jan, and John.
Yeah, you both make really good points. Now, but John, I have to ask, if you are taking the hosting into account, why is Martin Short so low?
I guess that is a very, very good point.
Yeah.
Yes, I guess that is a good point. I would just say that having, I guess, yeah, for having Marty for only like 17 episodes as a cast member, I find it very, very difficult to rank him in here. Like, again, Marty isn't the 200th best cast member in the history of the show. He's just probably like outside my top 50. Like, that's why I have him there. But maybe you're right. I mean, I guess a lot of the people ahead of him have either had cameo appearances or come back to the host of the show. But as Marty is getting closer to the 5 Timers Club, maybe I should reconsider that. So that's probably the best argument in 10 weeks of the show to consider moving him up the list. So that is fair. I don't want to talk about out both sides of my mouth, but it is not just, like I said, that Bill Murray has come back to host the show so many times, but it just every time that there is a Bill Murray appearance on the show, I feel like it's like a godlike presence that has walked into the room. And to Gary's point, I think that if John Belushi was still alive today and he walks into Studio 8H, like, I think everybody drops their rundown sheets and like runs over and just like, I need to have a conversation with John Belushi. Like, that's how he could have a statue outside the building, like, as in terms of sports analogies. So like, for me, that's where, the Bill Murrays, Jan Hooks, and John Belushis are as far as being in a separate tier of their own so far on this list. I'm very curious to see over the next few weeks as we start to head towards this top 15, top 10, is anyone else going to be out there that the listeners ranked too low that we're going to start talking about? Could we make an argument of greatest of all time? So anyways, final point on this is that I am not surprised at all if you yourself at home have John Belushi as number 1 on the list. I think those first 3 are going to be something that we're going to continue to debate, and I will continue to move people up or down the list as we start to rank these final 21 cast members as they are revealed week by week. So this was so much fun to get to do this with you both, Bill and Gary. So such a pleasure to have you on the show. Can't wait to do this every single Thursday with all of our friends here in the chat. Bill, Kenny, thank you for joining us. Where can listeners check out everything you got going on?
Thanks for having me again, John. Always fun to come on and talk. You can follow me anywhere at BKLove73.
Gary, this was awesome. Just such a pleasure to have you on the show. Such a great wealth of SNL knowledge. So please tell the listeners all about your podcast, where they can check it out. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. This was great. This was a lot of fun. You can catch me and my co-host Brad on the Not Ready for Primetime podcast. It's available wherever you find podcasts, and we are on social media at Not Ready for the number 4 PT Pod. So hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, everywhere else. Thank you very much. This was great.
Awesome. Well, we don't have a hot take show this Saturday. It's our first SNL off week of the season. Boo, we want SNL, but yeah, they need a break. So we'll be back in one more week with host Timothy Chalamet and musical guest Boy Genius to do our full week of coverage then. So in our first off week of coverage next week, we have our first patron feedback show of season 49. That is a really fun question and answer show. We're going to put up a form on social media to ask you to send in your questions about season 49 so far. We will be there. I will be alive with Sammy K for the duration of that patron feedback show. We'll welcome in several patrons to answer some questions. And if you look at, Bill and Gary and everybody up here and you're like, I could talk SNL, I want to be up there. Well, register at patreon.com/the SNL network. You can come and jump on the patron feedback show with us and share your SNL knowledge. That is one of the great perks. In addition to the fact that we have another patron podcast coming out later tonight, that is the SNL sketch breakdown, where you, the patrons, have voted on which sketch you want us to talk about even more. And we have an exclusive podcast for you where we will get into great detail about that podcast, including, who wrote it, why they wrote it, were the lines correct, was it correctly casted. So it's really, really fun, that show that we're doing exclusively for patrons. You can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, X, and TikTok at the SNL Network. And please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. All right. On behalf of Bill Kenny and Gary Seath from the Not Ready for Primetime podcast, I want to thank you for joining us on our countdown of the greatest cast members of all time. We will see you next time, everybody.